So as I mentioned, we have two guest speakers who have agreed to be a part of this workshop, Dr. Jason Kwan and Ayomide Fakuade. So a little bit about Dr. Kwan first. Dr. Jason Kwan grew up in Toronto, Ontario, and completed his undergrad degree at McMaster University in the Health Sciences program. He then went on to complete medical school at University of Toronto. In regards to his research interests, Jason is passionate about the intersection between dermatology and neglected tropical diseases. He is now starting his residency in dermatology at UBC. Ayomide is a third-year medical student at Dalhousie University. Hailing originally from Lagos, Nigeria, he was raised in Ontario, where he completed his undergrad studies at York University, majoring in biomedical sciences and minoring in psychology. Through his undergrad education, Ayo remained active in his local community by volunteering with his church, and he also sought opportunities to learn more about the clinical and research aspects of medicine by volunteering in hospitals. So here are just some takeaways that I hope you guys take away from this presentation. Firstly, I hope you get a better understanding of what doctors do. Secondly, you can learn the steps of how to become a doctor. And finally, understand the nuances of medical school better. So like the specific requirements and the admission stats for each school. So before I dive deeper into the main content of the presentation, I just want to get a general grasp of your understanding of the medical process and the application process. So with a quick poll, I want to ask, how knowledgeable are you about the medical process and the application process? So I'm going to launch the poll real quick, get you guys to respond. Just going to end the poll here. Seems like, yeah. Okay, so as we can see here, most of people here don't have much knowledge regarding the medical process and the application process, while some are somewhat knowledgeable. Well, hopefully through this presentation, I can add to any knowledge that you may already have or help you understand this process better. So before we talk about the application process and all that, I just want to start with explaining what doctors do. One good place to start is through the National Occupation Classification, or the NOC. The NOC is Canada's system in organizing jobs. It collects data about the numerous fields of employment and provides critical information about each job. As there are many specializations for doctors, this presentation will generally focus on general practitioners and family physicians. To learn more about yourself, the code for this category is 31102. As there are many roles for doctors, I have summarized some of them here to the 5 that you see on the screen. So firstly, they examine patients and get medical histories. They order and interpret diagnostic tests, which include lab tests and x-rays. They provide emergency care. They prescribe and administer medication and treatments. And finally, they provide preventative care, such as vaccinations, prenatal and postnatal care, and counsel patients on health-related matters. So let's start. The first step would be getting your bachelor's degree. There might be a misconception that you have to have a science degree in order to apply for med school, but that isn't true. I would say don't stress too much about choosing which bachelor degree to pick for your undergraduate. While picking a science-based major would be helpful for both the MCAT and medical school, it isn't a mandatory requirement. The only requirement is to have a bachelor degree before you can apply, no matter the major. Also, I do want to point out that applying to a university that already has a medical school doesn't necessarily increase your chance of getting into that medical school. So to show you these 2 points I've mentioned, I want to direct your attention to some statistics, to some admission statistics from 2 schools. So firstly, we have McMaster. Majority of people here ended up having a science degree, but we can see that some don't. 5% had arts and science, while 1 to 2% had various business degrees such as music, math, and business. For Western, they didn't go into as much detail, but we do see that 25.5% didn't have science degrees. This just goes to tell us that having a science degree doesn't necessarily mean it's okay to pick a non-science degree and you can still apply for med school, no problem. So step 2, that'd be applying to med school, which is like the main bulk of this presentation. So before talking about the requirements, I do want to show you some admission statistics from the 2025 admission cycle. These admission stats will help you get a general better grasp of what schools typically will accept in terms of grades and scores. It'll also help you show you what's considered competitive for each school. So starting with U of T, they accepted 226 students, which is an admission rate of about 6%. The average GPA was 3.4. And going back to an earlier point I mentioned about the location, while people of U of T did end up getting into UT Med School, it doesn't necessarily mean that they had a higher chance. As you can see, many actually came from McMaster instead. Furthermore, degree breakdown, non-degrees and 3-year bachelors had 13%, 4-year bachelors 51%, graduate and professional degrees 36%. In just a moment, you'll see why this is important. So what are the requirements to be accepted? There are 8. The 8 you see on the screen here are the general things that most schools will require. Of course, not all schools require every single element. So for U of T, it is okay to apply in your 3rd year. U of T allows them to apply, students to apply in the 3rd year of undergrad, but it is on the condition that you have had 15 full course equivalents, or FCEs. So an FCE is pretty much 1 full year course or 2 single semester courses. For GPA, their minimum requirement is 3.6. However, 3.8 would be considered the competitive standard. The 3.6 is mostly used as a cutoff. So if you apply and your GPA is 3.5, then your application doesn't even get considered at all. U of T considers cumulative GPA. So summer classes, grades from other universities and programs will count towards your GPA. The only courses that don't count would be part-time courses, and they would help count towards meeting prerequisites and credits. For the MCAT, their standard is a minimum score of 125 per section, and which allowing 124 for one section. So the MCAT for U of T isn't used competitively. It's mainly used to screen applicants. So if you don't meet the minimum, your application won't be considered. So for example, those with a 528 will be considered the same as those with 500. And the MCAT they look at is your most recent test. For extracurriculars or autobiographical sketches, U of T looks at 4 clusters: professional, looking towards your responsibility and maturity; communicator/collaborator, which looks to teamwork and time management; scholar, which looks to achievements in leadership, research and awards, publications and scholarships; and then advocate looks to your community service and social responsibility. So these are different activities that you would have to put in your application for these different for U of T. For prerequisites, there are 2. So firstly, you have to have 2 FCEs in any life science, 1 FCE in any social science, humanities, or language. There isn't a minimum grade requirement for these prerequisites. And also U of T suggests, or U of T also has this recommendation that you have a statis, university level stats course and 2 FCEs with expository writing, but there are just recommended, not mandatory. However, I do want to note that because medical school is so competitive, recommended would typically mean mandatory anyways if you want the best chance of getting accepted. For essays, you have to write 2 personal essays where you would discuss the school's mission and values, 1 autobiographical sketch statement, which talks about your activities and how it prepared you for med school. So this looks towards your employment, volunteer activities, extracurriculars, awards and accomplishments, research, and other activities and achievements. For references, they need 3. While there's no specification on who to ask, it's best to follow the general guidelines of references in applying to med school. It's 1 academic or professional, 1 personal, and 1 of your choice. And Casper is not needed. I'll explain in more detail what Casper is, along with MCAT. Now looking at McMaster, they accepted 205 students, which is an admission rate of 3.7%. And the degree type, again, 63% are still doing their bachelor's, so they probably applied in their 3rd year. 22% would completed their bachelor's degree, and 50% had graduate degrees. The average GPA was 3.1. And for the degree breakdown, I don't think I have to mention this again because I went over it in an earlier slide, but you can take a look for yourself. And then for the MCAT, they only look at 1 section, which is the CARS, and the average is 129. Again, I will go into more detail about what exactly happens in the MCAT. So McMaster's med school is a 3-year program, unlike the other med schools in Canada. I just want to let you know about that. Again, you can apply in your 3rd year, no problem. You just have to have the 15 FCE equivalents. GPA, the minimum is 3.0. No mentions were made for the competitiveness, and summer courses do count towards GPA for McMaster. You can use the admission stats to get a grasp of what's considered competitive though. For MCAT, they only consider the cars section, and the minimum score is 123. Other sections aren't considered for this, and they also use the most recent test. Extracurriculars, they don't need. Prerequisites, they don't need. Essays, they don't need. References, they need the 3, the 1 professional, 1 personal, 1 of your choice. And Casper is needed, but schools rarely tell you what the cutoff is. So assuming that because everything is so competitive, this would be 2. So you probably would have to be in the 4th quartile or 75th percentile to be considered competitive. Again, I'll go into more detail about what Casper is. So you might be thinking, wow, these conditions are so easy to apply to. Well, this is how McMaster decides who they decide to interview. So there's 2 rounds. Firstly, there is the invited to be interviewed. So the 32% of it comes from GPA, 32% comes from MCAT, and 32% comes from the Casper test. And then there's also, if you have a graduate degree, there's a bonus of 1% if you have a master's and 4% of PhD. So they'll get these couple of factors to determine if you even get an invitation to be interviewed. The second round would be post-interview and offer of admission. So 70% of it comes from MMI, 15% from GPA, and 50% from your MCAT. So what is MMI? So the MMI is a multiple mini interview. This is a pretty important aspect. It measures competencies like oral communication, social and nonverbal skills, and teamwork. These are important indicators of how an applicant will interact with patients and colleagues as a physician. These interviews don't focus on scientific knowledge, rather they focus on an applicant's critical thinking and interpersonal skills. So what happens in these interviews? You will be moving around different interview stations, around 6 to 10, and each station will have different issues. So some topics may cover critical thinking skills, current events, or role playing. So here I have an example question of what they might ask. A 14-year-old patient requests birth control pills from you and asks you not tell her parents. What would you do? In this case, there is no right or wrong answer. The examiner looks to how you would tackle the question. One decent example would be explaining how the patient's well-being is a main concern. First, you gather more information. Ask if she understands what she's asking for. Has she had birth control pills before? And if she's being forced or coerced, et cetera, et cetera. Based on these answers, you would then take the appropriate response. For example, if she understands, then you would prescribe the pills, but you would mention how it doesn't prevent STIs and stuff like that. If forced, then you will contact the appropriate authorities. If she doesn't understand, then you have to tell the girl that you will talk to her parents. It's a judgment call on your end at the end of the day to see if the minor is mature enough to understand the circumstances she is in and what she is asking for. Essentially, the MMI is very important to the application if you do get called for an interview, but this is only something to worry about after you've been selected for an interview. For Queens, there wasn't too much information that was made available on the admission statistics. All we know is that 109 students were accepted, which is about a 2% admission rate. The GPA average was 3.81, and the average MCAT was 511. So the requirements here, again, you can apply in your 3rd year, no problem. For GPA, the minimum requirement is 3.0. And again, there is no stated number for what is considered competitive. So try to use, I guess you can use the admission stats as a guide for that. For the MCAT, the minimum score varies year to year, and there is no stated exact number that you can find. So it's hard to say what the cutoff is, but again, you can try to use the stats to guesstimate what could be considered competitive, what could give you a better chance of getting in. And they use your best MCAT test score. For extracurriculars, they're based on 5 categories: employment, volunteer activities, extracurricular activities, awards and accomplishments, publications, and research. The listed topics should be relevant to medical school. You can list a maximum of 32 items, but it's not required to fill all of them. Do as much as you can though, because it is a competitive thing. And because it mentioned that you can list 32, it's a sign that extracurriculars are pretty important to Queens, and just in general, extracurriculars are pretty important. Prerequisites is not needed. And for the essays, this will probably come from the extracurricular portion, asking applicants to give a brief description of their activities. Again, you need the 3 references: professional, personal, and of your choice. And then Casper, again, it is required. There was no stated score, so do the best that you can. Western accepted 171 students, which is about a 7% admission rate. 63% of people had bachelor degrees, 31% had graduate degrees. Again, with the breakdown, 75% majority had science degrees, while about a fourth didn't have science degrees. Average GPA was 3.81. And MCAT, they listed 3 sections for the average scores for them. BBFLS is the biological and biochemical foundations of living systems. The average score is 129. CARS was 127, which is a critical analysis and reasoning skills. And then finally, there's chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. It misses the 4th section, which is the psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior portion, but it is still required. So Western is a little different. You can't apply in your 3rd year, you must apply in your 4th year, because you must have had a full 4-year undergraduate degree to be considered. For GPA, the minimum requirement is 3.7. This is slightly higher because it looks at your 2 best years. Summer courses don't count toward your grade. The 2 best years must include 5 FCEs and 3 FCEs that is at or above the year of study. This means that if say your 3rd year is your best year, then you must have taken 3rd year or better courses during that year. Intro courses taking during 3rd year, if you take a majority of say Psych 101, Econ 101, that kind of stuff, if majority of your course load in your 3rd year or 4th year was intro courses, then that would make it ineligible because it doesn't meet that requirement. For MCAT, it's similar again. The minimum score varies year to year. They use the most recent score, and it's not stated what the cutoff is. So do try to get as high as you can. Extracurriculars, there are a maximum of 8 activities. They're based on 4 categories: teamwork and leadership, respect for diversity, equity, inclusion, and decolonization, social accountability and responsibility, self-directed learning, problem solving, and critical inquiry. So as I mentioned earlier, you can put a maximum of 8 activities to fit in these 4 categories. Each of these must have a verifier, a minimum of 4 different objective verifiers to prove that you actually did these activities. This actually applies to every extracurricular activity that you report in. And the minimum you can put in is 4. But again, if you just hit the minimum, that won't make your application competitive. Prerequisites is not required. Essays, you can potentially write up to 9 essays. So 1 for each extracurricular activity. And there's 1 more for the about you or challenge essay portion. 3 references, again, 1 professional, 1 personal, 1 of your choice. And Casper here is not needed. So Ottawa, the reason why I don't have a slide for Ottawa is because there wasn't too much information shared by them. All we see is that they accepted 183 students, which is about an admission rate of 3.7%. So Ottawa allows students to apply in their 3rd year of undergrad. The minimum GPA is 3.5, but higher is obviously better. Summer courses do count, and they use the 3 most recent years of study. MCAT, which is kind of different here, is not needed, unlike all the other schools. Extracurriculars. So the most that you can have is 18. So try to pick, in your experience, the top 3 experiences from each category that would help boost your application. They're the 5 categories you see on the slide here. For prerequisites, it is a bit more demanding than other ones. There are 6 prerequisites you must meet, and there is a minimum GPA standard you must maintain within these 6 prerequisites. So you need 6 credits in bio, 3 credits in OChem, 6 credits in humanities or social science, general chemistry 3 credits, biochem 3 credits, stats 3 credits. Essays, there weren't any mentions of it on the school website, so I'm not 100% sure what is required there. But I would assume that you would probably have to mention something about it in your extracurricular portion of the application. For the references, again, same 3: 1 professional, 1 personal, 1 of your choice. Casper for Ottawa is required, so do the best you can in this score. So about the MCAT, what is it? Well, it's the test that assesses your knowledge of natural and social sciences concepts and your critical thinking and scientific problem-solving skills required to begin the study of medicine. There are 4 sections that you'll be quizzed on. So the first one is biological and biochemical foundations of living systems. This focuses on processes that are unique to living organisms, such as reproducing, adapting, and acquiring materials and energy, and how cells and organs systems within an organism act independently. The main disciplines are first semester biochem, intro bio, gen chem, and OChem. The percentages you see beside each discipline speaks to the volume of the percentage of questions they're going to ask you within the section. So here we'll see that they're asked more about intro bio questions than they will about OChem questions. The second section is the psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior. This tests your understanding of the different ways psychological, social, and biological factors can influence perceptions and reactions to the world. It emphasizes concepts that indicate how physicians need to be prepared to deal with human and social issues of medicine. Next is CARS, critical analysis and reasoning skills. So this tests your reading comprehension, reading what's within the text on the surface level and reading deeper into the text. And they focus on theories and ideas of different disciplines, such as ethics, philosophy, studies of diverse cultures, and population health, and many more. For chemical and physical foundations of biological systems, this focuses on the mechanical, physical, and biochemical functions of human tissues, organs, and organ systems. It also tests your knowledge of the basic chemical and physical principles that underlie the mechanisms operating in the human body. For scoring, the scores range from 472 to 528. There is a scaling from a raw score to a final score. If you want more specifics regarding the MCAT, this is a link that I'm going to put in the chat that was provided by the AAMC, which is the official organization that organizes the MCAT. So general tips that I have these are just some guidelines that you can follow. As I haven't taken the MCAT, but I have taken the LSAT, which would be the law school equivalent form of the exam, I would say the preparation stage is pretty similar. Definitely start with a diagnostics test, see how you do without studying and understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are. This would help you with understanding what kind of material can show up on exam. Secondly, gather resources. So Khan Academy could be a good starting point as it's free and pretty comprehensive. AAMC also has 2 free practice tests you can use. Some other options which would cost a bit more money would be Kaplan MCAT books, Princeton Review, or even UWorld. This is pretty common. These are some pretty common resources used by students when studying. And then studying and practice often. Practice timing yourself while answering questions. Obviously start with untimed responses, but slowly build up to it. Try to understand the concepts behind the answers. Don't just breeze by answers that you got right, and also obviously not the wrong ones either. Because oftentimes these concepts can come up in different variations on different tests. Studying with others can be beneficial too. Quizzing and testing each other is a good way to see if you understand the material. And really just practice, practice, practice. That's the only way to learn from these tests. You can try to understand concepts and such, but mainly the main bulk of studying you do is through repetition. So some general things to keep in mind is how many times can you take it? Well, in 1 year, you can take it up to 3 times. In back-to-back years, you can take it 4 times. And in your whole lifetime, you can take it 7 times. And when would be a good time to take it, you may be wondering. Well, there is no exact date I can provide for you when you should prepare. General consensus would be that you would want to prepare as early as possible, which would maybe be your 2nd year of undergrad. Mainly because the process of becoming a doctor is a long one. Trying to get into medical school as early as you can would be ideal. One possible suggestion would be to take the MCAT in your 2nd year and then apply to med school in your 3rd year. And if you didn't do as well as you hoped, you could take it again your 3rd year and ideally be more prepared than before. Again, these are just some general guidelines. You don't have to stick to them too closely. Obviously, do what works for you. Casper. So Casper is a situational judgment test. So what would you do in this situation? It's pretty similar to the questions that I posed, that sample question that I used in the MMI. They ask very similar topics. So the breakdown for this is there's 2 sections. There's the video response, which has 2 word-based scenarios and 4 video-based scenarios. There's a written response, which has 3 word-based scenarios and 4 video-based scenarios. In both sections, they will pretty much ask you to take on a role. So say, whether it be a parent, a teacher, et cetera, et cetera. So they will give you a situation and then they'll say, you are the teacher in this situation. How would you deal with this situation? That kind of stuff. The total time it takes to complete this test ranges from 90 minutes to 110 minutes. And there are a total of 14 scenarios. For scoring, there is no real scoring sheet that you can look at. So when you get your results, it places you in a certain quartile. And in order to be the 4th quartile or 75th percentile and higher means you got a decent score. The score is based relative to other test takers, so there is no set standard to show that you passed or anything like that. For preparation, again, with this, I don't have much to say other than examiners want authentic answers out of you, which is why they don't recommend you working with third parties to build your answers. It is best to understand the answers and understand what the examiners want from you. For the values, these are the values that examiners hope to get from you, things that can't be tested on academic exams and can't be truly portrayed through just writing. So stuff like collaboration, motivation, communication, empathy, equity, problem solving, professionalism, and reliance and self-awareness. So med school, what actually occurs during med school? The curriculum is split into two sections. In a typical 4-year program, the first 2 years would be spent in a classroom learning foundational theories. There won't be too much practical experience, but there has been a trend in medical schools to push for greater exposure to practical experience during the first 2 years. This is mostly to prepare you for clerkship roles you experience during your final 2 years. So clerkship is when you actually get hands-on experience. You get to work with physicians and other healthcare professionals in hospitals and clinics. It's an integrated learning opportunity, caring for patients effectively, efficiently, and humanely. During this time, you will have core rotations that all students must go through, and then there are some electives you can choose from. So this would be the perfect opportunity for you to explore a number of specialties and see how your skills fit into each specialty. The typical rotations that most med schools will see are the ones that you see on the screen. So medicine, OBGYN, surgery, family medicine, emergency medicine, psychiatry, anesthesia, and pediatrics. Typically, by the end of third year or after your first rotation and first clerkship, you would have a general idea of your specialization or target or patient population you would like to work with. I do want to make another note that McMaster, because it's a 3-year program, it doesn't change too much in comparison. It just makes the first for the first half of the foundational courses a little shorter, allowing you to experience more of the clerkship part. So from this point on, I would say don't worry too much about this section, as it will be some time before most of you even reach this stage. But I'm including this in the presentation for the sake of completeness, letting you know what the couple final steps is to become a recognized doctor. So the MCCQE Part 1. This test is the part of the requirement that allows you to practice medicine in Canada. It isn't the full qualification. You would also have done at least 1 year of residency to be fully licensed, but this is pretty much half of it. For content, it's in this little diagram. It's in the diagram you see here. There are 2 categories: dimensions of care and physician activities. Under dimensions of care, there's health promotion and illness prevention, acute, chronic, psychosocial aspects. Under physician activities, it's assessment, diagnosis, management, communications, and professional behaviors. Furthermore, the numbers that you see that borderline the diagram indicates the weight of that section. So for assessment and diagnosis under physician activities, it says 45%. So there would be more questions on that than, for example, communications. And then scoring, the total score is between 100 and 400. In order to pass, you must be above the pass score of 226. Residency, this would be considered your first real job. It's also known as the postgraduate training aspect. Depending on your program, residency can last anywhere from 3 to 7 years, and you would apply through the CA RMS. There are 4 types of matches that you can apply for. The first would be main residency match. This is the path that most people take after having freshly graduated from medical school. Within this, there are many different areas of specialization you can pick from. Some could be from topics you did during your clerkship, and some could be totally new. Medicine subspecialty. This is for those in internal medicine who want to apply for subspecialty training. This isn't a path you can jump directly into, as you must have done at least 3 years of postgraduate training. Family medicine, this is for those in this category that want to pursue enhanced skill training, and you must have done at least 2 years of postgraduate training. And pediatrics, this is for those also looking for subspecialty training. You must have done at least 4 years of postgraduate training. All right, so now it's time for our guest speakers to take the main stage. Because Dr. Kwan isn't here, I'll just ask how it's going to work is I'm going to ask a question first, and then we'll have Ayo speak first for his experience, and then we'll see how Dr. Kwan responded to this as well. So for the first question, Ayo, why did you decide to pursue a career in medicine? I think I don't know about others, but I can't really hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's all good now.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I'd say part of the reason why I pursued a career in medicine, honestly, part of it was just that I've just naturally been attracted by it since I was young. But I'm not going to go too much into that. But the other part was that I kind of had a close experience with healthcare when I was a bit younger, which showed me, the part of healthcare that they don't really show on TV or whatnot. So long story short, we had neighbors for over 10 years and they're an older couple, and one of them was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And over the course of a couple of years with the disease, I just saw how that basically changed him as a person. But the part that stuck out to me the most was the effect that it had on his loved ones. When you think of illness, you usually just think of the sick person and how they, how the disease affects their body and whatnot. But I was really struck by the effect that having a sick person in a household can have on those around them. Right. So it really encouraged me to want to become a physician who cares for families dealing with that illness experience, which is something completely different from the regular life that they had known for how many years in advance. So I'd say that's the main reason or experience that pushed me.
Yeah, that's super personal stuff. Wow. Okay. I don't know how to respond to that, but I guess we'll just move on. So this is how Jason responded.
I think the decision to pursue a career in medicine really stems from, I think, the interest that I had in high school. I think particularly the subjects in STEM relating to like biology, chemistry, even physics were of curiosity or of interest for myself. And so when I was thinking about what to take in undergrad, that kind of led me to my decision taking health sciences. And then the idea of medicine came to my mind. A lot of my peers actually wanted to go into medicine, and with the courses that I took in undergrad, mainly also biology and also anatomy, I kind of fell in love with just the field of medicine. As you get to explore a little bit more about the interests of medicine, there's a lot of human connection, a lot of human growth that's associated with this field. And so it just seemed not logical for me to go into medicine afterwards.
All right, next question is, Ayel, how did you decide on, or what do you plan on specializing in? I know you probably haven't selected anything because you're about to go into your third year. So do you have any ideas what you might want to specialize in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm still ultimately deciding, but I have areas that I'm interested in. And part of what went into that decision was figuring out things like, okay, do you like more clinic-based work or more surgery? Do you want something where it's kind of just you, or do you want a specialty where you're working alongside residents and other healthcare workers? So I'd say I like more so a few procedural things. Coming into med school, I was very dead set on surgery, but now I've been exploring a couple of other non-surgical specialties. But I'd say surgery still has a place in my heart. But to name some of the other non-surgical ones, I guess anesthesia, I'd just be on the other side of the curtain with that. But even within that, I found myself really gravitating towards chronic pain management, just given there's a bit of a psych component to that where you can kind of marry the medicine with that. And then you also do some procedures then. But also if I'm thinking more surgical, ENT is still very fascinating to me. But I'm also very captivated by the mind. So a couple of things with neuro related, whether that's surgery or just clinic based. So I'd say that's where my mind is for right now.
Yeah, what was in law school that changed you from being so dead set on surgery stuff to more procedural stuff?
Yeah, I'd say part of what comes with surgery is lifestyle. Surgery almost requires you to be married to your work a lot more. Not that non-surgical physicians are less committed, but with surgery, there's a lot more hours that goes into play, and if there's a complication afterwards, you're the person that they're calling, where you don't really have that if you're a non-surgical specialist, where if someone's doing the surgery, it's going to go to the surgeon. So I'd say that was the main thing that shifted me away from surgery. And I just really found that I really enjoyed clinic-based work. I loved going into the clinics and meeting the patients and getting to know them on a lot more personal level. I found that with a lot of surgeries, you don't get to know your patients as well because things are a lot more fast-paced and you're moving from patient to patient. And this really, one can argue that it's more focused on the surgery, where in my opinion and in my experience, clinic-based work is more so focused on the patient. And I really enjoyed that.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
After medical school, you get to kind of apply for the specialty that you want to do in the future, and that can change after residency as well, or within residency, but it's much harder to do. So the decision to make this big choice is a big one. Well, to start off with, what led me to dermatology was actually my interest in tropical diseases, and that is just something that I particularly enjoyed on my own time. Tropical medicine and like parasitic infections were something that I just enjoyed learning about on my free time prior to even going to medicine. And so I actually did research in these types of parasitic infections in undergrad and then also in medical school. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do in terms of specialization, I was thinking about internal medicine and then going to infectious diseases and then going to tropical medicine. But I kind of figured out or discovered that what I enjoyed the most about tropical medicine was the visual representations on the skin. And that got me thinking about dermatology. And then the more I learned about it, the more I kind of fell in love with it as well. So that's why I chose dermatology. Kind of gives me the leeway to go into tropical medicine if that's something I want to do, but also I enjoy the bread and butter.
All right. So next question is, I hear many things about being med school being super challenging and having so much, you're like super focused on work. How was the work-life balance for you in your experience?
Yeah, I would say that one thing that rings true is you get busier with each year that you go back, that you go through. But one other thing I will say is you, at least for the first 2 years of med school, you have a lot more time than you think. So I'd say if the work-life balance for first year was good, but I'd say that my work-life balance for second year was even better, although I was busier. So I'll say that in my first year, there was a lot of time in the schedule to do things outside of medicine, right? And outside of studying. But I found myself pretty preoccupied with, oh, I have to study this, I have to do that, I have to really just thinking about the work a lot. So I kind of tied myself to the desk a lot more, which, I mean, it worked out in my favor. But looking back at it, if I could do it again, I could definitely see where I could have taken more breaks and enjoyed myself and enjoyed things outside of medicine. But then going into my second year, since I had gone through some of those things once, the neuroticism almost died down a bit. So then I could really see where I could take breaks. And second year, the courses are a lot denser and I took on some extracurriculars within the school. So I had more things on my plate, but I still found that I was able to have more of a social life and still go out sometimes during the week if I recognize that, oh, you know what, I can take this night off. I can do the rest of my studying on Wednesday. And just if I needed it for my wellness, I did it. And I found that was a lot more sustainable for me. And then I've heard that the work-life balance in clerkship isn't too bad ultimately. It'll vary with the rotation that you're on. Like I'm starting with neurology, and that's pretty much an 8:30 to 5, plus some call shifts, let's say once or twice a week, depending on your week. So that's not too bad. But then some specialties like general surgery, those are the busy ones because you have to be at the hospital like 5:30 a.m. and you probably leave at 6 p.m. And then some days you're on call until the next morning. So all in all, it varies since you're testing, different things in your third year.
All right, thank you. Now we'll see what Jason said.
I think work-life balance is really important. It's one of the things that often is compromised when you're in the specialty. And you, as you were saying, the hours can be changing on a consistent basis. You can have overnight call shifts. Your clinics can go overtime. You wake up really early at days, and your times off can be very variable. But for me, I think work-life balance is something that you have to kind of integrate that into whatever you do. Medicine for sure is really, really busy. That being said, there are many opportunities for you to also integrate a balance into that. So for instance, there are days off that you can enjoy what you do, like whether that's like exercising, whether that is hanging with your friends. It's definitely difficult for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Amount of studying and the amount of actual work you have to do. In medical school, it is a bit difficult to find that balance. But there are definitely opportunities to do what you enjoy, and also kind of remind yourself that at the end of the day, like, medicine is one aspect of your life. It's a career path.
And
it's important to put effort and emphasis into it, but it's also just important to apply that to the other parts of your life.
All right, next question. So what I kind of talked about this in your intro anyways, but so what did you study for your undergrad degree, and did that play any role for you in applying to medical school? So it's kind of talking to the aspect of that aspect I mentioned in the beginning, how any degree is really fine, but for you, why did you go into health science and not other stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did a major in biomedical science at York University, and I did a minor in psychology. I chose to study that mostly because it made things a bit easier when preparing for the MCAT, and also getting into med school. It wasn't the first time that I've seen or heard of a lot of the concepts, right? Some of the things in med school are brand new, but I think your first unit in essentially every med school is just a foundational course, right? And that's basically your 4-year biology degree in undergrad condensed into anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, right? So imagine seeing all those concepts for the first time then, or seeing them for the second time. The first time you would have seen them, what probably would have been the MCAT. It's a lot to deal with. And even for the MCAT, if you're the type of student who prepares for the MCAT in the summer between, school years, right? And let's say you're not only studying for the MCAT, but you're doing research or you're working too, it's going to require a lot more time. So although I had entertained the idea of studying music as my undergrad, I decided that at the end of the day, it would have made things a lot easier for me down the line to do something science related. And the psychology minor was something that I found out that I became interested in over time. So I just tacked that on to the biomed major, which was not initially my thinking going into university.
Thank you. Jason's response?
So when you apply to medical school, you can apply with any degree as long as you have the prerequisites necessary. So I have friends applying who applied for medicine with an engineering degree or an arts degree or an English degree. And so there's a wide breadth of degrees to medicine that doesn't really dictate your capabilities of like succeeding in medical school. I think so. In terms of like, is there a particular one I would suggest? No, I wouldn't say. I would say choose something that you're really passionate about, and then if medicine falls afterwards or while you're in undergraduate, then of course like try for those prerequisite courses and apply. The undergraduate degree that I went into was health sciences, and that was at McMaster University. So the thing about that is that like it's good in the sense that like it is geared towards healthcare, medicine, nursing, physiotherapy, occupational therapists, and so forth. There is a gravitation towards a field in healthcare, and for me, the most important aspects about being that program was that I just got more exposure to courses that are related to medicine. And so that's why I developed more of an interest, such as like anatomy, which was a big one for me. And my peers around me also had that similar view of wanting to go into healthcare. So it was nice in the sense that like you have people around you that are also trying to be like do it, like work in a job that's related to helping people in the healthcare system. But ultimately, I don't think that there's a particular undergraduate degree that I would vouch for. I think it's something that you think you can succeed and excel in. Of course, there's like the idea of like GPA and marks and grades. So as long as you are able to keep well with that and have a passion in medicine, it doesn't really particularly matter which undergraduate degree you get.
All right, next question. So this is more of a follow-up question, like following the undergrad, like in the event you say you didn't get into med school, like on your, right, would you have considered getting a master's degree? Do you think that would have helped you in any way?
I thought about that for a little bit, but ultimately, no, I wouldn't have done a master's. For, I guess, honestly, the main reason why I decided against it is that I'm not the biggest research person. Now I'm kind of changing my mind because I'm getting exposed to a lot more and I'm finding niches that I'm enjoying. But at the time, I didn't want a career that was really research based, number one. Number two, some people often do a master's degree, in the meantime while applying to med school. But I found that not every school gives you a GPA boost or a points advantage for having a master's degree when you're applying, right? At least the schools that I was applying to. So to me, the 1 or 2 years that I would have spent working on the master's and the money for that was not worth the advantage if ultimately I wanted to do med school. And trying to see if there's anything else. And yeah, it never really was on my mind during undergrad. So when I did think about, okay, what would this look like? It was in my 3rd and 4th year. And I didn't want to just scramble into any master's degree because, again, time is precious. And I had one thing on my mind ultimately. So it just never really meshed with what I had planned for myself.
Yeah, I think Jason had a similar answer to what you said. I feel like most people think that because med school and become a doctor is such a long process. You don't really have time to spend doing other stuff, especially everything after med school too. Is like it's a long time. So yeah, I definitely hear you on that point. So we'll see what Jason said.
There is a lot of people who get master's degrees if whether it's on their own volition, like because of their own interest, or even afterwards if they apply in like 4th year or after their last year in undergraduate degree, and then wanted to like bolster their application in some sense to apply for medical school again. When I was applying for medical school, I didn't want to do a master's degree. Reason being just because I didn't have anything in particular interest that I wanted to go into. Master's degrees are usually ranging from 1 to 2 years additionally, and there wasn't anything that I wanted to do. So I was going to take a year off if I didn't get accepted to medical school after my 4th year, and then to do maybe more research or maybe something more interested or maybe just live life a little bit.
Okay. All right. So my next question is mostly focused on clerkship. I kind of split it here because what I asked Jason, because he's gone through clerkship, but for you haven't yet. And so my question to you would be, what are you looking forward to for your clerkship portion of your education? And what are you like not looking forward to? Like, what have you heard from things like, oh man, I really don't want to be doing this part?
Sure. I guess let's start with the not so good stuff so we can end on a good note. I'd say the things that I'm not really looking forward to are just some rotations that I'm not a fan of, or some specialties that I know that I don't like. For example, general surgery. I'll do it. We all have to do it, unfortunately or fortunately. But it's one of those things where I'll just smile and nod my way through it. I'll still learn it. I'll still study it, but I will be very grateful when it's over. So some specialties that I'm not interested in. And then I'd say the other part that I'm not really looking forward to is, okay, part of clerkship, at least at Dow, a lot of your rotations are 2 to 3 weeks long, but a lot of them are, let's say, 2 weeks. So because of that, there's a high turnover rate. So one thing I've often heard from upper year students is, there's a high learning curve, but once you finally get to feel like you're doing something, like you're doing things smoothly and you understand how things are working on the floor and you've made a rapport with people, the 2 weeks are up and you're on to something else. And you're back again to being the new kid. You're back again to being the new student, learning everything. So that you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and with that unfamiliarity. So now I'm warming up to it, but it's definitely something that I was a bit weary of a few months ago, like early on in med school. And then I'd say some of the things that I am excited for, some of the things that are in the specialties of my interest. I'm excited to be out of the classroom because some of our days for the first 2 years could be, 8 hours in lecture, and you're learning about all these fascinating things and these treatments and these diseases, but it's a bit dry when you're just sitting in a classroom listening to someone lecture or multiple people lecture at you. So I'm excited to get a bit more hands-on and to start, doing more hands-on practice with clinical exams and history taking and learning about procedures, often assisting in some surgical procedures. So that's really exciting. And honestly, I'm really looking forward to just the personal side, the interpersonal side of medicine, getting to talk to patients. I really love relating with patients and getting to talk to other allied healthcare workers, getting to talk to nurses and just really appreciate what others do, whether it's physical therapy, occupational therapy, nursing. I've had some experiences where I've kind of been exposed to what they do, and it's been really fascinating because it's often very different from what they teach us as medical students. So I'm looking forward to being fully immersed in that day in, day out.
So overall, you feel excited for it?
Oh yeah. I'd say a few weeks
Nice.
very nervous, but now, like, I've gone into the neuro clinic a few times just to get some exposure, and now bring it on.
Nice. So Jason's question was, how was his clerkship experience and what were some challenges he faced? So let's see his response right now.
So for clerkship, for people who don't understand or I've never heard of it, it's kind of like your intern year in the hospital. So the first 2 years, that you said, are basically more lecture based, and you get some clinical exposures on different occasions. But in your third year and even your fourth year, you're working in the hospitals as if you're part of the team, not as if you are part of the team. And the challenges of that is that you're going from a schedule of maybe like a few lectures a day into a full working hour. So you work the same amount of hours that your supervisors and the residents are working, but at the same time, you're also being evaluated. And so you, at the end of each block, you might have an examination based on which rotation you're doing. And so you have to study in your free time off while also working, and also you're not getting paid. So that's also a bummer as well. So it's a tough year for sure for everyone, just because, number one, you're going from a place where you're not talking to patients on a general basis to like getting their history, thinking about their management, thinking about like what are the next steps, and also at the same time you're trying to learn the material on your own time. So it's definitely that year for everyone is the exponential growth. You get a lot of confidence at the end of the year, knowing that you've done so much and learned so much. So it is a great opportunity. It's challenging because it's a huge change, and also it's very time consuming. So the work-life balance during clerkship is a difficult one to manage. Definitely doable, but definitely needs a lot of constant revision.
Okay, so this next question is mostly for Jason. So Ayo, you don't really have to say anything here. But the question I asked him was, what were some differences he experienced within clerkship and residency? And here's what he had to say.
In my experience, at least right now, I'm in my second month of residency, and I enjoy a lot more than clerkship. particularly because number one, you kind of have a good foundation that you've built in from clerkship. So you're going in again and in your first year, sometimes you might have an off-service year, which means that you rotate through a bunch of different specialties again, or you're working in a specialty that you're specializing in. And with that, you have a good baseline of all the experiences that you've done in the previous 2 years. And so you're working upon that. There's a lot of additional responsibilities, and also you're able to write prescriptions for your patients. So you're taking more ownership and more responsibility, but you're also feel like you have more control over and more autonomy in what you do. The staff feel a little bit more, you feel a little bit more confident, and so you participate in more of their care. And I think that's a very powerful thing that I felt like was kind of missing in clerkship. And you're getting paid, so it's nice to have that.
Okay, so this next question is for both of you. So for Ayo, well, how has medical school treated you so far, and what was a typical day like for you within medical school?
Overall, med school has been amazing. I would say that it's been pretty much what I had imagined going into it, but I have no complaints about it, thankfully. I'm very grateful for that. I'd say a typical day for me. Sorry, we've been on summer break for a little bit, so I haven't been.
All good.
We're back into it on Monday. But I will say a typical day for me consists of waking up. First thing I do when I wake up, look at my schedule for the day and see, okay, when is the lecture and do I have anything else? Sometimes if I'm doing extracurriculars, I'll have a meeting that day or whatnot. So check my schedule, get myself oriented for the day, and then usually stay at home a bit too long and then have to run to class for lectures, do the lectures. And then if it's a really busy day, then I'll immediately just go to the library and start reviewing a few things. But if it's a bit lighter, then after class, I'll just talk to a couple of friends on campus, see if they want to grab lunch or whatnot. And then after that, we may study together. I like to do a lot of my work alone. So once I get my socializing done for the day, then I'll either go to the library or go home, and I'll just review the lectures for the day and maybe take a look at the lectures from the next day. And if it's really deep into, a block, which range from 4 to 14 weeks long, then I'm going to review some other contents. I like to use Anki, so I just do some cards or create some new cards and study well into the evening, and then see a couple of friends again if people are free. If not, then just watch Netflix till I fall asleep. But that's pretty much it, day in and day out. And then there's some variations depending on how close we are to the exam, because at Dow we do block unit exams, which again are anywhere from after 4 to 14, or I'd say the longest one is 10 weeks of content. So, some days will be busier than others.
It just sounds like there's a lot of studying you do, because you say you just have blocks on end of studying. But that's been fine for you?
Yeah, I'd say in first year, I would study during the weekdays. I'd study about 8 hours a day, 6 to 8 hours a day. And on the weekends, I would say on average about 18 hours, including Saturday and Sunday. Second year, it got cut down quite a bit. I'd say second year, I'd study Monday to Friday on average 2 hours a day, 2 to 3 hours a day. And then on the weekends, an average of 8 hours. So part of that is just becoming a lot more efficient. Part of that was just, again, I was doing a lot more in second year, so I didn't have the luxury to just, because sometimes in first year, like you sit at your desk for 6 hours, but you're really only productive for 3 hours. So I didn't really have the luxury of time to do that. So it's like, if you're going to study for 2 hours, you're going to make it worth it, right? And then just,
sure.
Yeah. So it was interesting. You definitely learn as you go through med school.
Mm-hmm. that hour cut down is insane. Wow. All right. So this is what Jason had to say to this question.
I think it really depends on which residency you're in. For dermatology, our first year is off-service year. So I was saying before, our first year we rotate through a bunch of specialties that are adjacent to dermatology, but are really important to get a feel for again. So like things like pediatrics, family medicine, emergency medicine. So the day depends on which rotation that you're in currently for that month. So for example, like right now I'm in family medicine. So I work family medicine hours. So I work from like a 9 to 5 with like an hour lunch. I see maybe like 15 patients, maybe like 7 in the morning, 8 afternoon. And it's more of a faster pace, like usually around 15 minutes per person. Like meeting new patients, and also like in a different like mindset of like what's follow up and what's pertinent today. Whereas like in the last block, just like last week, I was in pediatrics in an inpatient hospital, and that means that like the rounding hours start at 7:30, I end at 6 p.m. And I'm seeing kids that are usually more sick. So I'm thinking about what's your management within the hospital rather than like, can they go home or like what should they do outside? And we're managing their whole health, whereas like in family medicine, you're able to kind of like do sections at a time. So it really depends, but it is exciting in that way.
All right, next question. This is mostly for Jason. If I assume because stuff after residency is going to be a long time for you coming, so I won't ask you this question. So this is mostly for Jason. What I asked Jason, because he's in the middle of resident, well, he's in his second month of residency, but like because he's further down that process, I asked him how he thought what he would be doing moving forward.
I haven't thought too much about it. I think there's many years for me to kind of decide, and also I think my decision will sway. You can do, after residency, you become a full staff, and you get a lot of autonomy with that. But you can also do additional research and or additional fellowships. Usually that is around like 1 or 2 years additional to your residency. And so I've thought about maybe looking into different types of fellowships in the future, maybe doing tropical dermatology, but I think that really depends in the future.
Okay, next question. This is for both of you. So Ayo, this mostly gets into the process of applying to medical school. So how was that for you? Both the application process and like your mental state at that time, because I imagine it's probably pretty hectic and stressful.
Yeah, this is a loaded question, but I'll try to keep it concise. I'd say to summarize the application process, 3 words: long, expensive, but rewarding. And I say that because I call it long because I applied to med school twice. First time I applied to the 6 schools in Ontario, second time 3 schools in Ontario, Dalhousie, and 8 US schools. So the American system and the Canadian application system, very different. And the US system has like, it's almost 2-tiered, where you'll do your general application, which includes like your autobiographical sketch or like your CV, and write about some experiences that mean a lot to you. And then in the second phase, you write essays that are specific to each school, right? And some schools were nicer and they'd have maybe 3 essays that you have to write, but they're max 200 words. Other schools were not so nice and they'd say, write 3 essays that are 1,500 words, right? So now if you get the average of that, multiply it by 8, I think that summer I typed over 80,000 words between all of the applications. So that's what makes it long. It's expensive because again, you have to pay for each application. So the more schools you apply to, the greater the cost, plus the MCAT if you're writing the MCAT in that summer, plus Casper. Thankfully, interviews are now virtual, so you don't have to pay for travel anymore. But I would say that it's rewarding because you're doing a lot of introspection, thinking about your experiences so you can write about them. You're doing a lot of writing. So if writing is your weakness, it gets better. Like I was a really poor writer at the beginning, but it made me a much better writer at the end. So I'm really appreciative of that. And it just allows you to just look back at the time that you spent working on the application, and not just the summer months, but the years that you spent going to school and volunteering and doing the extracurriculars. And I really just appreciated the fact that I was able to put in all that work for it. So that's why, I wanted to end with a positive spin, but it definitely was a rewarding process.
Interesting take, because the rewarding process I was not expecting. Yeah, nice. So this is how Jason had to respond.
I think the path of medicine is one that if the people around you haven't been through it before, it's a very unique experience and a very difficult one in a sense. Difficult in the sense that there's a lot of steps and a lot of different like little gears that kind of add up when you're applying. And that can take a toll on your mental health for sure. It's stressful because you need to get like your courses all done. You need to get the grades that you want to achieve. You have to get the MCAT done. You have to write your applications. You have to do your interviews. And so that is a process that everybody who applies for medicine will go through. What's really important to keep in mind is that there are many opportunities to ask for help and support. And there are also many opportunities after applying. So if you don't get in your first time, you can reapply again. And there are a lot of good tools that you can make to your application. I think what's really important the most is that if you have other people applying with you, it's to have a collective group of like people that are going through it with you. I think it's like trauma bonding in a sense.
Yeah.
But also in a sense, like sometimes there's too much emphasis on the result of getting into medical school that takes a toll. So if like statistics shows that like usually the average amount of times you apply is up to 3 times before you get into medical school. That's like the average. And so not getting your first time it's definitely a hard one to take, but definitely something that is very, very common, very normal as well.
All right. So the follow-up question to like how your process was, do you have any tips or tricks for those who are looking to apply for med school, like probably maybe within the next year or so?
I see some tips. If you have friends that are applying, I would definitely recommend like going through it together. I think Jason said that in one of his responses, because it makes it a lot easier to have people supporting you through it, but also people you can commiserate with. So that's number one. Number two, I would say just try to think back on all the experiences that you've had in the last like 6-ish years. And what I found is that writing them down and thinking them through was really helpful, because you could you had experiences that you could recall during interviews, experiences that you could talk about in your essays, experiences that you could write about during Casper. So it's good to just build a bank and have them prepared ahead of time. That's number two. I would say if you're applying, the name of the game is practice, especially for Casper and for interview questions. Just there are a bunch of resources online, find them, do them over and over. And it's a skill. Interviewing is a skill. Answering questions is to an extent a skill. So the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it, the more you'll be able to recognize things like, okay, how do nerves affect you? Are you the type of person that gets nervous when asked a question, or do you feel like you're on the spot? So it'll help you with those skills. And off the top of my head, I would say those are my top tips and tricks. But if else, I'll add them.
All right. So we are almost running out of time. So I'll just play Jason's question next, and then we'll immediately head into Q&A session if you guys have any more questions, but I'll just play Jason's section first.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconception when applying to medical school that you need like a full list of like research done or a full list of extracurriculars that you've done. I don't really think it's about quantity. I think it's about quality of things that you've done. I think showing commitment to things that you enjoy, things that you can actually like talk about in your interview or when you're writing your application is so important. And to remind everyone that like the diversity in medical school is incredible. Like we're coming from such different backgrounds. There's no particular one activity that's better than another activity. It's always to show like that you're genuine, that you have motivation, and that you can kind of take away from skills and information from one aspect in your life and apply it into a medical sense. And so don't let anybody tell you or be intimidated by how much somebody has in research or somebody has in like leadership positions. Those are great to have, but it's not the one-all be all.